all of the indigenous people across the Southwest had extensive trade networks, and they shared information. And simultaneously with the Cabrillo expedition, about the same time, you have Coronado inland, and you have one of the supply ships, well, a couple supply ships that were going up the Sea of Cortez. They go all the way up in between Baja California and the Mexican mainland. They get to about where the Colorado River is emptying out the delta. They get up in that region, and they're trying to supply the Coronado expedition, which is traveling around inland. Well, that information had traveled all the way to the Chumash villages on the west coast of the United States, today's United States. And so they tell Cabrillo and his men, hey, there are people who look like you traveling about a week or so inland.
Welcome to California Frontier, the show about the often overlooked and unexpected early history of the place we call California. I'm your host, Damian Bacich. Good to see you, Eric. It's been,
Very good to see you, Damian. Yeah.
When I last saw you,
just talking about a week ago. That's right.
That's right. You were climbing up a mountain, right? You were hiking. You were climbing up a mountain. That was great. On one of your explorations.
I know. We were having this full conversation while I'm out in the hills, and it's like, hey, Damian, here's one of the mission villages. You can see this right here, in the background. So it was really cool.
Yeah. It was really cool. And you were telling me about some interesting. I mean, this is just, like I said to you, this is just I think every so often we should just catch up. We should hear about like what you're doing. I can share what I'm doing. And just, share with people out there these cool and interesting things that are happening. So, yeah, you told me you're working on something right now, but I don't remember 100% what it is. And just to remind people, you are down near San Juan Capistrano in Orange County.
That's right. Yeah, I'm down in San Juan Capistrano. And so, yeah, like you, Damian, it's like we just have tons of projects that are constantly going on. And, one of your other guests was Dr. Marie Duggan. She's a friend, both of ours. And she was able to very graciously send me scans of the Mission San Juan Capistrano account books. So it's been really fun because I've been able to go through those, do some translations, and some of the artifacts that are there at the mission, may show up in those account books. So trying to date those and kind of tell more of their stories. So that's one of the things I'm working on. And then the other thing, among many things, another thing I'm working on is constantly working on early exploration of California, with an emphasis on working towards the Portola expedition, which I've already written about in my neck of the woods in Orange County, but trying to write about, the entire kind of expedition is a goal of mine. And to write about the entire Portola expedition kind of requires a full, kind of overview of Spanish involvement with California going all the way back to the 1500s. And so a lot of what I've been working on lately has been trying to put that whole story together. And it's kind of this huge, interesting story right from the get-go I don't know if people aren't all that aware of it, but there are many details, I think, that aren't out there that are really extraordinary and really are like, you can't believe these stories really happened, but there are a bunch of them. And it goes all the way back to the Cabrillo expedition. And so starting with there, and there's just a bunch of really interesting stories carrying out throughout the 1500s and through to the Vizcaíno expedition in the early 1600s.
Yeah, you told me now. Okay, so the Portola expedition happens in 1768, 69. And
yep.
The first, we have Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo, who comes into San Diego Bay and then up the coast in 1542. And then right. Vizcaíno in 1602. But you were telling me about some other things that were happening in the 16th century. I thought, frankly, here's my ignorance, I really thought that that Cabrillo was the only Spanish, or some people say Portuguese, explorer coming into California in the 16th century. But you said that there were other expeditions going on.
Absolutely, yeah. So, we know about Portola because that's when the Spanish came here permanently. And that's in, like you said, 1769, 1770. That's when the first missions are founded in Alta California, today's the state of California. But, going back from 1769 all the way to Cabrillo in 1542, you have the Cabrillo expedition has some incredible story elements that I think a lot of people aren't aware of that are really worthy of note. And I can go over some of those. But after Cabrillo, you have a consistent kind of Spanish, touches on California. And in a couple of cases, you actually have short land expeditions in California by the Spanish, two of them. And then in addition to that, you also have the Sir Francis Drake, working for England, who's here in 1579. So there's a whole story here. And I don't know how you wanted the conversation to work, but I can start at Cabrillo and kind of just walk through and tell you about all of them.
Yeah, let's do that. That sounds great. Let's start with Cabrillo and let's walk through.
Wonderful. Well, Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo, first you pointed out that, yes, we research by Wendy Kramer has kind of determined that he was certainly associated with Spain, possibly from there. But recently, we also found that there's other research that supports the idea that he may have been Portuguese, and that's something that goes back to the early 1600s. That there was Herrera had mentioned that he was Portuguese, and he very well may have been born in Portugal. But Cabrillo is amazing because he was a crossbowman with Cortez in the battle at Tenochtitlan, which is Mexico City, in 1520 and 1521. And so, this is just an amazing
super young when that happened too?
Yeah, he was super young. That's exactly right.
Wasn't he like a teenager?
And yeah, he was very, very young. And he was working with Velasquez, who was the governor of Cuba. At least that's what we think. And Harry Kelsey wrote a great biography about him. You can read about it. It's really amazing. So he was involved with the earliest, conquistadors, throughout Central America. And he was involved with going into Guatemala under Alvarado. He was involved with a lot of really interesting early stuff. And so what happens is I don't know how many people are aware of these things, but Cortez himself, after taking over Tenochtitlan, Mexico City, he gets into a lot of different things. And one of the things he gets involved with is he establishes a very short-lived colony in Baja California called Santa Cruz, which is in today's La Paz. That's in about 1535. But at the same time, the first viceroy of New Spain, right, the king's kind of right-hand man in the Americas, in North America, Mendoza gets here in 1535, gets to the Americas. And so now things start to kind of organize. So instead of like the conquistadors taking things over, now it's like, okay, the king's going to start actually having bureaucrats who are organizing everything here. And so Mendoza gets in to place. And right as he gets into place, he first of all, he pulls Cortez and Santa Cruz. He ends that whole endeavor. But then thereafter, he starts to have more interest in things about the northern frontier, right? I mean, if you think about it from the Spanish perspective, they had Tenochtitlan, and in South America, Pizarro and the Inca. And so there's this idea that there are these other civilizations off to the north that have value. And then you have the merging seven cities, right, myth. And, the amazing, Panfilo Narvaez, and you have he's doing an expedition in what is now the Southeast United States. It goes all wrong. They get shipwrecked. And about Cabeza de Vaca, who ends up kind of walking back to Mexico City, exploring a bunch of the southern and southwestern United States on his way. And of course, when, what emerges is there's something to the north, something with, there are other civilizations to the north that have a lot of riches. And this is what leads to the Coronado expedition, 1540. And it's also what kind of leads to Cabrillo. And so Cabrillo is going up along the northwest coast. He's actually part of a double-pronged expedition. The other expedition leader was Villalobos, who went west to the Southeast Asia, to the so-called Spice Islands. And among the Spanish, their thinking was that, the Pacific Ocean wasn't this big, large thing, but that North America and Southeast Asia actually kind of connected. So Cabrillo was going to go up to the northwest coast, and the idea was that he would meet possibly in Southeast Asia where these islands were. And that's why he ends up setting up camp on San Miguel Island, which is the westernmost Channel Island. And they're way out there. And there are people on the expedition. There's Spanish on the expedition who had already been to Southeast Asia previously. And so they're kind of saying, yeah, I think this is kind of about where, we're close to Southeast Asia, and they're nowhere near it. They're across the Pacific Ocean. But that's kind of what the expedition's about. They're really thinking that they could find a trade route over to Asia. And this would be the completion of kind of the Columbus dream, right? If you go back into the 1400s, Europe had been cut off from trade with Asia. You have the fall of Istanbul at the time, Constantinople, in the mid 15th century. And so there was this kind of break in European Asian trade. So the whole idea was that if they could find a water route over to Asia, this trade could continue. That's what Cabrillo's doing. But his expedition's unreal. I mean, there's unbelievable things that they discover for the Europeans. One of the things that they're most impressed by are the Chumash. They see the Chumash houses, and they're like, wow, these guys are way advanced. And they have these tomahawk canoes, and they're beautifully made. And the cool thing is that they had obviously been ordered to write down the names of the villages, of the Chumash villages. And I think that's because they were looking for these 7 cities, Cibola or Chibola. I've always read it. Do you know how to pronounce that, by the way? Is it
Cibola?
Chibola? Cibola. There you go. And so, Cibola. And so he's writing down these village names, and some of them were the exact same village names that 200 plus years later, when Portola gets there in 1769, during the mission era, it's the same village names, Point Mugu and Limu for the name of Santa Cruz Island, the biggest of the Channel Islands. And, we can actually see in this written document, this summary of the Cabrillo expedition, you can see those very village names, those Chumash village names. And this is unique. None of the other early expeditions wrote down the village names. After Portola, you would have excursions out into the surrounding country around the missions, and they would write down village names. And, those are the kinds of source material that we have for helping identify some of those villages. But for 1542 to have village names written down is really something. And so that's one of the amazing things about this. One of the other amazing things about this is that Cabrillo does something that it's just a sentence, but it's an amazing sentence. He's sailing up the coast of California. This is the first time the Spanish have been here. And so everything's new, and they don't really understand the scale of how big the Americas are. And he gets to the Santa Clara River Valley, which is, he gets near Ventura, which there's a Chumash village there called Sisolap or Shisholap. It's kind of spelled in different ways. And around there, he seems to send 2 Spaniards on an overland expedition to the Colorado River expedition, I should say. They're being sent with a letter. And what precipitated this is that all of the indigenous people across the Southwest had extensive trade networks, and they shared information. And simultaneously with the Cabrillo expedition, about the same time, you have Coronado Inland, and you have one of the supply ships, a couple supply ships that were going up the Sea of Cortez. They go all the way up in between Baja California and the Mexican mainland. They get to about where the Colorado River is emptying out the delta. They get up in that region, and they're trying to supply the Coronado expedition, which is traveling around inland. Well, that information had traveled all the way to the Chumash villages on the west coast of the United States, today's United States. And so they tell Cabrillo and his men, hey, there are people who look like you traveling about a week or so inland. And so Cabrillo hears this, and he goes, I'm going to send these 2 guys with a letter to tell them that we're here. And there's some debate about whether he actually did, trying to understand, that sentence. But it seems that he actually did send these 2 people inland. And if they had gone inland, we can kind of get a sense of where they went because we know what those indigenous trade routes looked like, and we can kind of follow them. So it's just one of these amazing stories that, it doesn't get much attention. But, these are the two earliest ostensibly Europeans to ever go inland and, into off the coast of California. It's an amazing story. And on the other side of it, another thing that doesn't get a lot of, attention, but I think it's worthy of mentioning, Cabrillo takes a couple of Chumash individuals back to Mexico City. We don't know if they got back, but he certainly took them with him. And so, I love thinking about these stories because they're just unbelievable stories, thinking about, Chumash individuals being taken all the way possibly to Tenochtitlan, right, in the 1540s. So the Cabrillo expedition has all these wonderful stories associated with it. And it's truly a remarkable expedition. I mean, the amount of information they were able to get at that early of a date is unreal. And then to cap it all off, Cabrillo dies in California. He dies probably on San Miguel Island. And so, the story of the conquistadors, right? This whole idea of the fall of Mexico, and it's like one of the greatest events in the history of the world. And one of the individuals who was in that is buried here in California, right? So from a very early year, California is a part of this story. And so it goes all the way back to 1542. So
we don't really think about that very much.
Yeah, it's an amazing it's an amazing thing to consider. Yeah, and the story continues on. Yeah,
you're right. No, what you said about the names of the villages, the Chumash villages, is really interesting because, as I mentioned to you when we talked about this last week, that means that there's a real continuity of centuries, right? The same village is there clearly at least a couple of 100 years, but maybe longer, right? And so it gives you an idea, at least to somebody who's not an expert on native life. But when you think of California Indian tribes or Indian communities, we're often told about hunter-gatherers, right, or tribalists or things of that nature. And the idea you have is that there weren't permanent settlements or hardly any permanent settlements. But when you have a village that has a name and it's there for over 200 years, and it probably existed for much longer, I mean, that really gives an idea of a real permanence of a civilization, a permanence of a society.
I totally agree. And to some extent, this should be expected because the material culture of the Chumash was so advanced. Much later, when Portola gets there, one of the military engineer who's with him, who keeps a diary, Miguel Costanzo, he writes in his journal, this is in 1769, that these wood plank tamal canoes that they have, that they are taking from the mainland near Santa Barbara in the Santa Barbara region. They're going all the way to the islands, the Channel Islands, which is unreal, to do trade. He says that their construction is so impressive that he goes, even a carpenter with the best tools from Spain could not make this, right? It's like, this is so wonderful. And so the continuity of the villages, to me, it's like, right, the village names are still there back then because they'd been there for a very long time, because this society had been around for a very long time. And that's, their material culture suggests that was the case. And they were extremely important, not only in that region in Santa Barbara, but the Chumash who are populating in that area, like, they are part of a trade network that we know goes all the way throughout the southwestern United States, right? I mean, we know from Cabrillo, because they knew about all what was going on inland. But they're also trading with the islands to the people south and north. We find the bead money that they're producing there. That's found all throughout my area, down through Orange County and even further south. So yeah, the continuity of the villages, it's like something that all of us can just get to get our heads around. They were part of an extensive network of villages that had been there for a very, very long time. And the Cabrillo expedition, what we have, the summary journal proves that. So it's It's extremely fascinating. It's unbelievable, and we're very lucky that those village names were preserved, because the Vizcaíno expedition didn't write those village names down. The Portola expedition journals don't write those villages down. So we have just these precious few, but it really authenticates the what we do have from the Cabrillo expedition, which I'll go into what little we have from it. The summary document that we have, it has these village names, it has the island names, and so we can really go, hey, this is a legitimate document.
Yeah. Okay. So then let's talk a little bit about what comes after Cabrillo.
Absolutely. So the Spanish kind of lose interest with California. It's way up to the north. They didn't find the seven cities. They didn't find an obvious passage over to Asia. They didn't find another passage, which was the Strait of Anion or Anion, which would go across the northern part of North America, maybe connect back over to Spain. They were really just getting to know the area. But then what starts to happen is this whole idea of connecting a trade route between Mexico and Asia becomes more and more important, because the trade route that is along the sea that goes around bottom of Africa, Cape of Good Hope, from Asia back to Spain, you pass through a lot of areas that have civilizations. And so it's very dangerous. And so the idea of getting there by sea becomes more and more interesting to the Spanish. So by the 1550s, you have individuals who are working in today's Mexico, New Spain, trying to find a way to make this happen. And by 1565, the Spanish have found a trade route that goes from mainland Mexico, today's mainland Mexico, getting over to the Philippines, which is where they establish a colony there. And so then the question becomes, can we get from the Philippines back to Mexico? Because the idea would be that you could take silver and gold from the Americas, take that across to the Philippines, trade it for goods from Asia, which would be, silks and ceramics and those items of that nature, gold too, and spices. And then you could get that back to Mexico. And then via Mexico, you could get it all the way back to Spain. So in 1565, the first ship does this, that gets from the Philippines back to Mexico. And to do that, they have to go along the Northern Pacific Current. That Northern Pacific Current takes ships. It's a long time. It's many months at sea, but it takes them to what is today Northern California. And so they first sight land in Northern California. And one of these first ships that does this, actually the second ship ever to do it, and it was in the year 1565. When they get to California, a report is made by a man named Father Urdaneta that he says, yeah, when they first got to California, they sighted the island of San Salvador. The island of San Salvador was named by the Cabrillo expedition. And Father Urdaneta is the guy who wrote the summary of the Cabrillo expedition that came down to us. And so he uses the name San Salvador, which was the island today of Santa Catalina Island off the coast of Los Angeles. And he uses that. Cabrillo had named that after his ship, the San Salvador, which they have a model of at the Maritime Museum in San Diego. So Urdaneta and the ships coming back, they start sighting California in 1565. Fast forward, and in 1578, now you have ships going each year, taking, usually precious metals from Mexico over to Asia, loading them up with Asian goods, and then taking this northern current back to Mexico. And on the way, they sight California. They become known as the Manila Galleons, right? This is kind of the emergence of the Manila Galleons. Well, in 1578, one of these galleons actually goes aground in Baja California. And there has been some wonderful work. They found all sorts of ceramics in the beaches there. The location is kind of a secret, but this was a big deal. And the name of the ship was the San Juanillo. And this was a big loss because this was the dream of Europe, to get some kind of trade route with Asia, and they finally achieve it. And here's one of these big ships coming back, and it literally goes aground, and the loss of all the crew, and none of the material got back to Mexico. And this was also how Mexico City was gaining power. Mexico City was kind of a middleman between Asia and Spain, right? And so, if you're the middleman in a trade network, you usually do well. So one of these ships goes aground in 78. In 79, Sir Francis Drake, right? England's at war with Spain. He comes up the western coast of the Americas, and he comes all the way up. He's actually looking for the Northwest Passage, right? He's trying to get the Strait of Anion to get back to England. Maybe he can go around the top of North America. Of course, it's way far north and very, very cold, and so he doesn't get there. But he comes and he lands in California in today's Drake's Bay, just north of San Francisco. And you know about that story. So now you have the English here, right? So the Spanish lost a ship in 1578. The English get here in 1579. And there's a crazy story with Sir Francis Drake, another story that a lot of people don't know about, which is just an unbelievable story. It's California's Cabeza de Vaca. Like I mentioned earlier, Cabeza de Vaca had done that big walk from the southeast United States all the way through the southwest back to Mexico over a period of a couple of years. He finally arrived in Mexico City in 1536, and I think the expedition left in 1528. So it was a long one. But Sir Francis Drake is here in 1579. And with him, we know on record, was a pilot named Morera. Morera we have that on record. Well, this little tale gets passed down, and in the 1620s, we have a letter that was from a guy in Mexico who heard it from one of the members of the later Vizcaíno expedition, Father Ascension, that there was a guy who apparently was on Sir Francis Drake's expedition. Apparently his name was Morena, so N. de Morena, which was very much like Morera, one of the pilots, who was sick. And so Drake left him in Drake's Bay left him for dead when Drake left in 1579 from Drake's Bay. And apparently Morena walked back to Mexico over a period of 4 years. And we have this document from the 1620s. Along the way, he apparently sees this huge arm of the sea, which is obvious. It's like either Sea of Cortez or he's talking about San Francisco Bay, right? There's these kinds of analyses or fun things to think about. Like, did he think that the San Francisco Bay connected all the way to the Sea of Cortez, and that's where the myth of the island of California came from? There's all these things that have come out of it. It's a story that's pretty hard to believe, but it is something that we can't disprove. And so as historians, we get to kind of have fun on this playground of thinking of this guy walking back to Mexico City. So he's kind of California's Cabeza de Vaca. And there's might be more information out there somewhere about him, but we haven't been able to get more. That's basically all we know, is that there's this story. But it's dated to the early 1600s that apparently this report gets written. We know the report was written then about him getting back in 1583.
It also makes you wonder, why was what from his name seemed to be a Spanish guy on Drake's ship? I wonder if he was a prisoner that he had captured, because Drake was a privateer, right? He was trying to sink Spanish ships. Maybe he was somebody who had been taken hostage or who had survived a shipwreck, and he decided, okay, we don't need this guy anymore. We're going to leave him here.
It's a great question. And one thing that I've noticed about maritime, kind of the culture and just the makeup of the people who are on these ships, even in the 1500s, these were extremely diverse crews from the very earliest days. And I'll get more into that in just a minute when I talk about another expedition to California. They were extremely diverse crews. And I think the idea was that he was Spanish of some kind, and he may have defected from Drake, and he did, walk back to Mexico City. He wasn't trying to get back to England. He obviously wanted to leave. You can try to make these inferences, but it's a really good point. And it's probably something we can know more about by looking at the crews. But yeah, the earliest crews are usually pretty diverse. And even though England and Spain had this constant conflict going on throughout this era and beyond, it just wouldn't surprise me if that you would have kind of mixed crews. And we know later on that would happen. But this is an early version of it.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the California Frontier Show. If you'd like to support the show, the best thing to do is to let other people know about it. If you'd like to support it monetarily, there are a couple ways of doing that. One is by scrolling down in your podcast app to where it says support the show. There you can become a subscriber for as little as $3 a month. And if you want to give a one-time donation, just below you'll see where it says give a one-time donation. Finally, the show is supported by California History Teachers, which is a full year of lessons for 4th grade California history and social studies. You can find out more at www.californiahistoryteachers.com. And if you input the coupon code PODCAST, you'll receive 25% off your monthly or annual subscription. So check it out.